Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this AC 500 course. Today, we're going to cover the module number one of these Microsoft Azure Security Technology features. So, guys, let's start and let's warm up the engines. Okay, first of all, let me make a small introduction of myself. So, as you can see right here, and also in the camera, this is me. My name is Andres Ibarra, and well, I am from Mexico. I am very excited to be here with you guys. And well, let me share with you a little bit of my experience. At the moment, I'm an MCT. That means that I am a Microsoft certified trainer. Also, well, some of my additional experience, I have the possibility to work for a Mexican bank for a couple of years. It was such a great experience. Then I moved to a new project, and I was a leader project of implementing a whole infrastructure project for an aluminum can plant. It was, again, such a great experience. Finally, I was quite a moving guy, an active guy, and I decided to move to a new environment and start my journey with the Azure features. So at the moment, I have, well, you can see some of my certification. I have some additional ones, but well, this is me. I'm going to be with you in these 5 days of course, covering these AC 500 Microsoft Security Technology features. So, well, let's start our journey. For the moment, I'm going to stop sharing my camera and continue with today's content. So thank you so much. Also, I want to make a kindly reminder that, well, we have a Q&A section. So our partners here are going to be very excited to be with you, helping you out with all your comments, all your questions. Also, if you want to provide some feedback, you have this section to leave your comments. So again, such a pleasure to be with you. I get to stop sharing my camera and let's start our journey. Okay, guys. Well, this AC 500 course, it's going to talk about, it's going to cover a lot of Azure features that provide security in different aspects of our activities. For example, this module number one is going to be related to protect our identities and the access of our users. The next days, we're going to cover the module number two, that is the platform protection. So we are going to talk about perimeter security, network security, also how to protect containers and host security. In the day number three, we're going to talk about data and application security. So we're going to mention some features like the Azure Key Vault, application security, storage security, and also how to protect databases. In our day number four, it's going to be related with security operations. So we're going to cover the Azure Monitor features. We're going to see what is the Microsoft Defender for Cloud applications. And we're going to talk about Azure Sentinel. But for this day number one, we're going to discover more about, again, identity and access. So these are the topics that we're going to talk in this day number one. We're going to cover Azure Active Directory. We're going to talk also about some other important features like enterprise governance, and we're going to talk about identity protection. Certain topics we're going to be able to cover it with lab activities, for example, hybrid identity and privileged identity management. We are going to move in the second part of this session to a lab environment, and we are going to be able to put it on practice and cover more about it. But well, we're going to mention a little bit of these modules, of these topics in the next slides. So let's start with the first one, that is Azure Active Directory. So maybe at this point of your life, guys, if you're looking for this course, it's because you maybe right now are related or are close to these products. But let's take a quick refresh of what does Azure Active Directory is, how does it work, and what is the difference between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So right here, you can see that it is the way that Azure provide assign us an identity provider in the cloud. So previously, we used to work with Active Directory services, and these were related to the year 2000. Just imagine how many years Active Directory has on the market. So the new version, moving to new horizons, in this case to the cloud environment, it is the evolution called Microsoft Azure Active Directory. So this Microsoft Azure Active Directory now allows us to manage devices, users, and apply some policies and how they access to the information. For example, conditional access, conditional specific conditions to the users to access from different places or to use certain applications. So all this is going to be related with your organization security posture. So let's make a small let's see the difference between Azure Active Directory and Active Directory. You can see right here that the way that they authenticate is different. For example, now with Azure Active Directory, we have different ways to use authentication. For example, we can provide cloud authentication or hybrid authentication if we want to work with our Active Directory services on premise. So we can mix the cloud services with our on-premise services and make that hybrid environment. If we work directly with Active Directory, we only have authentication method like Kerberos protection. In this case, now we have the new authentication process. For example, we can use OpenID protocols, the SAML protocols, and also WS Federation. Previously, we used to work with Forest and with domain servers. Now we're going to work with tenants in the cloud. And you can restrict or allow the access to Azure services or Office 365 products. For example, we can restrict the access to Teams, or we can allow to certain users the use of SharePoint. So when we used to work with Active Directory, we only provide protection to the access to certain local services, for example, a printer, file servers, certain line of business applications directly owned by our company. But now this evolution of Active Directory with Azure AD allowed us to do a lot of different more extend the protection features to a cloud environment. For that, guys, well, it's important to mention what can I do in the cloud environment. This is going to be related with the permission that I have. So in this case, the permissions are going to be related with roles. Another important thing to take into account is that I'm not going to provide all the power for my users. I need to restrict them and assign just enough privilege. and just when they require. So we're going to be able to do this with Azure AD. For example, you can see right here in this small table, our most powerful user is going to be assigned with the role of global administrator. What happened here? Well, if we want to manage all the features in Azure AD, we're going to assign directly this kind of role. But maybe we need to assign some administrator roles or activities to different users, and we don't want to these users manage different settings. For example, if I'm going to have a billing administrator, well, this billing administrator, we don't want to manage application or manage users. So we can restrict what can they do, assigning that proper role for these users. We have right here some other examples of a large list of different built-in roles that Azure offers us. For example, the security administrator, well, it's going to be less powerful than the global administrator, and you can see that this is going to manage permissions related with security. For example, in Microsoft 365 features, in Azure AD, and also for the resources in Azure. Another role, it could be this billing administrator. So with this example, when I assign to a specific user this role, this user are going to be able to make purchases, and you can see right here, manage certain subscriptions, tickets, and well, in this case, manage all the process with the purchase. Finally, we have another last example. In this case, we're going to assign a role for a user that is related with as a global reader. So this role, the user is not going to be able to manage or make any change in our tenant, but it's going to be able to read important information of the different Microsoft services or Azure AD services, right? Now, guys, it's time to understand these Azure AD domain services. Remember that previously on Active Directory, we have a main domain that we're going to use to create and assign users. Now, with Azure AD domain services, we're going to do in a similar way. This is going to provide managed domain services with a subset of fully compatible traditional Active Directory domain services features. Some examples could be domain join, apply group policies, and or another example, the Kerberos access. Well, we're going to do in a similar way now in the cloud with Azure AD. So in this case, some of the features could be that is going to be very easy and very simple to deployment because we're working directly on a central platform on the cloud. So, we are going to be able to manage a single domain per Azure AD directory. We're going to have high availability with fault tolerance. So this is very important. Your system is going to be very resilient. If we want to create a hybrid environment where this is going to be possible, so we can use a feature called Azure AD Connect and bring our users from the Active Directory now to the cloud and synchronize when they make a change in their passwords, and they are going to be able to use the same credentials that they already use to access to certain services on premise. Talking about users, well, in this case, this is going to be, this is a small screenshot example of the Azure portal. In this case, right here, we are managing some users. In the same way that we use Active Directory, that we can add users related with our enterprise domain. So in this domain, for example, we have a Contoso domain. Each user is going to live on the cloud. And also, we're going to be able to bring users from other tenants or from other identity providers. For example, the first one, Irma Bailey, this user has a domain related with contoso.onmicrosoft.com. So this means that this user is going to be completely on the cloud. For example, Jose Ford, it has a domain in contoso.com. It is part of our organization, but this user, we bring this user from our with our Windows Server Active Directory from our on-premise infrastructure. And well, if I want to work with an external identity provider or invite some external users outside our organization, I can send an invitation to be part of my tenant, and these users are going to be registered as guest users. An important thing right here, guys, is that you are going to be able to assign roles to your on-cloud users, your synchronized users, and also for your guest users. So according to the activities that they are going to do in your organization, you can provide the appropriate permissions, assigning directly a role or being part of a group. So this group may have a specific role, and automatically when you add this user to this group, it's going to have all the licenses, roles, and permissions only for being part of this group. Talking about groups, well, this is going to be an easy way to manage the users. When we want to manage a large volume of users, we can create a group. In Azure AD, we have two different kinds of groups. So you can see right here that the first and the most common one is security group. On the other hand, we have Microsoft 365 groups. The main difference is that security groups are more used to with Azure AD environment or with the resources related of Azure. For example, assigning them licenses, assigning them permissions, or allowing them to access and manage certain resources like virtual machines or storage accounts. For example, Microsoft 365 accounts, Microsoft 365 groups are going to be related with communication process, managing exchange groups, managing, in the same way we can manage licenses of Office, but this is going to be more focused to Office activities. How can I add a user to this group? Well, I can add directly user to a group, accessing to this users and groups section. I'm going to be able to see all the users. Then I'm going to be able to manage the users and add directly this user to an existing group. Or additionally, if I have already a group, I can add a user. In this case, it's going to be our small user, right? If we want to do this automatically or dynamically, we can do that with dynamic groups. So what happened here, guys? According to certain conditions, for example, if my user it's going to work with a human resource team, well, I can create a rule and add automatically all the users related to this area to be part of a group. It is not going to be necessary to select all the users and take it back. And if this user moves from this particular area, in this case, the example was human resource, if maybe this user moved, for example, to an IT department, automatically it's going to leave the human resource group. So that is the benefit of using dynamic groups. Another important way to manage our users, in this case, it's by the use of administrative units. Previously, we used to do these features using organizational units in Azure AD and in Active Directory. Now, in the same way, with Azure AD, we are going to be able to use these administrative units. One great example is when our company, if it is a big one, well, in this case, we're going to be able to identify which users are, for example, for the region of Europe, which users are from America, which users are from Asia, and so on. So I can organize these users in one administrative unit, and in the same way, each administrative unit I can assign directly a role, be part of the group, and also, for example, I can have a global administrator from one administrative unit, one user administrator in the 4 different administrative units, as I mentioned in the example. For example, one for America, one for Asia, one for Europe, and so on. So this is the benefit of managing administrative units. If our organization is a large one, we can assign these roles and administrators. And talking about identity and access, well, these users that are going to have access to our resources, it is important to define how they are going to sign in and how to protect their identities. Also, that way, the way that they access to their devices. For example, managing passwords is one of the biggest problems of the help desk users, because they need to reset user passwords many times during the day. So a good way to avoid these kind of problems is by the use of passwordless authentication methods. Some examples of them could be using Microsoft Windows Hello for users at the office, and Hello for Business for big organizations. So this Hello for Business is going to be the best for users on their dedicated Windows computers. We can establish some authentication process with by the 2 security keys. So this is going to be especially useful for users who sign in to shared machines, like, for example, let's think, a kiosk, or in situations where the use of phones is going to be restricted, and the users are not going to be allowed to perform, for example, a multi-factor authentication. Talking about multi-factor authentication, we can use the mobile phones. So we can use our mobile devices to receive an SMS code, a call, or using directly the Microsoft Authenticator application, we can receive a specific code or opening and allow the signing attempt. So this is going to add an extra security layer to the signing process. Just to remember, a multi-factor authentication process, we are at an extra challenge for the signing. This is going to be related with something you know, something you are, or something you have. Something you know, well, in this case, is going to be related with a password. Something you are, this is going to be related with the use of your fingerprint or face recognition. And something you have, well, something that is unique and only you own this. For example, your mobile phone. So this is going to be related with multi-factor authentication, and we can implement this passwordless authentication to protect our identities. With that, well, this is the beginning of how to protect our identities on the cloud. How can we start creating and using these users? How can they are going to perform activities during these daily routines? For example, adding roles. And now we're going to see different protection features in the next slides. For example, let's start mentioning these identity protection features. Azure Active Directory identity protection includes 3 default policies. So we're going to establish these policies thinking in if, then statements. If this scenario happened, then I'm going to proceed in the following way. So again, Azure AD identity protection already includes these 3 default policies that administrator can choose to enable. These policies includes limited customization, but are applicable to most organizations. Also, all the policies allow for excluding a specific user or certain users, such as, let's think for a moment, an emergency account. What are these pre-class accounts or emergency accounts? For example, let's think in a common scenario in at our houses. If you lose the keys of your house, you're not going to be able to access to your home appliances. In the similar way, what happens if you are a global administrator and you lose control of your tenant or the possibility to access because maybe you were blocked by, to implement to access due to enforcing a policy in your organization. It is important to take in account this emergency break class account. So you're going to create a cloud-only user with this global administrator role, and you're going to exclude this user for all the policies existing in your organization. So this is going to be strictly for emergencies, and if for a certain reason your global administrator user are blocked, you can use this emergency account or break glass account to restore the access to your tenant. But well, again, by default, we have these three policies, so it is important to exclude these emergency accounts. And well, that's why we have the possibility to exclude groups or users. You can see right here, for example, that we're implementing a multi-factor authentication registration policy. So we are going to decide who is going to be affected creating or enabling this policy. In this case, we are going to use or select all our users, and for all our users, we are going to establish a control. In this case, the control or the parameter is going to be, okay, for all my users are going to require to use a multi-factor authentication registration. So every time that my users generate a new attempt to sign in, they are going to be remembered to register at least their mobile phone or a different method to create this multi-factor authentication process and face this additional challenge to access to our resources. We can also have the policy, but we can turn it off in case that, well, in this case, I need to disable it because it generates a lot of issues in our organization. Well, I'm going to turn it off. But in this case, if I test with a small group of users right here, and it worked perfectly, now I can change the users to all my users, and I can enforce or turn on in a certain way this policy. So in the same way, let me clean a little bit right here. Here we go. In this case, the other two ones, the default policies that we have, it's the user risk remediation policy and the assigning risk remediation policy. Again, who is going to be affected for this? What are going to be the conditions? So this is going to be related with that behavior of a user, or this is going to be related with that during the signing if we detect that this signing, it is a risky one. In this case, if I detect that my user behavior is not going to be the proper one, I'm going to require it to perform a change of their password. In the other policy, for example, you can see right here that if I detect that the signing it's not legitimate, I'm going to ask for my user to be required to perform a multi-factor authentication. In the other hand, you can create as many policies as you require. For example, if my users belong to a specific location, well, these users, for example, located in Washington, for all these users are going to exclude the use of multi-factor authentication. Or I can restrict the use of a certain application. So you can manage these if-then statements with Azure AD identity protection. Now, well, talking about identity protection, we have some risk events that it is important to monitor. For example, what happens if I detect that the credentials of my users are leaked well, this is going to be considered a risk event. If I detect that my user tries to sign in from an anonymous IP address, or for example, for a web browser that is not allowed in my organization, let's think in a Tor browser, I'm going to consider this action as a risky event. If my user belongs to a certain location and I detect that somebody else with the same account try to access but from another different country, well, this is going to be something risky. And again, I'm going to generate a registration of this risk event. And so identity protection is going to be able to identify risk in this anonymous IP address, a typical travel. If another example for it could be this one. What happened if that device that my user at this moment it's trying to use to access and it is related with a malware? Well, I'm going to be able to detect and prevent the signing process. We have also another features that are going to detect if my user account are going to be attacked by a password spread attacker. So this is going to indicate that multiple users, for example, at the same time, are being attacked using a common password in a unified brute force manner. Right here, for example, let's think that I use external bad user tries to use the same password. It's going to be a common password, and it's going to use with the user A, with the user B, and with the user C. This is going to be an spray attack. The attacker are going to try to access this common password, and maybe if this password, some of my user A, B, or C make match, well, the attacker is going to have success to accessing to my cloud resources. But this kind of risky activities and events are going to be automatically detected by Azure and are going to prevent the access from these kind of attacks. A last example, we can say that, well, suspicious inbox forwarding, this is going to be detected again as a risk event. So this detection in particular is going to be discovered by the use of a feature called Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Talking about user risk policies, well, in this case, identity protection can calculate what it believes is normal for a user behavior and use that to base decisions from their risk. The user risk is a calculation of probability that an identity has been compromised, as we saw in the previous example right here. This is going to be detected automatically. So the administrators, once that these events and these risky actions are detected, well, if you are an administrator, you can take action in this process and directly block access or allow the access. And also, if you're going to allow the access, you can require the change of the user password. So you can see that we are managing and discovering what are the activities of my user, my organization, and you are going to provide these if-then statements to take a decision. So again, the administrators can choose to block, allow, or maybe require the self-service password reset service to the next signing process for a specific user. You can see also we have different categories or different levels of risk. For example, we have low risk, medium risk, or high risk. The highest one is going to be related with leaked credentials. So it's going to be automatically detected by Azure that the leaked credentials of my users are now at the, again, let me take it from the top. Azure automatically is going to detect if some credentials of our users are leaked, and this is going to be considered as the highest risk event. So you can see right here, for example, we have high risky users, medium risky users, and well, unprotected risky signings. So you can take control and see what is happening in your organization, and you, as an administrator, are going to be able to take decision. In the similar way, with the signing risk policy, so the signing risk policy detects suspicious actions that come along with the signing. So it needs focus on the signing activity itself and analyze the probability that the signing may not have been performed by the original owner or the original user. The signing risk is going to check for things like whether a user has assigned from an unfamiliar location or an unfamiliar, let's think for a moment, an unfamiliar IP address. At the end, again, the administrators can choose to require a multi-factor authentication process for all these users. You can see right here, if you are going to allow the access, or in a completely different way, you can block completely the access. The user risk policy detects the probability that a user account has been compromised by detecting risk events that are atypical for a user behavior. So these risk events require the recording of a user's activity over a certain period of time. And in that period of time, well, we are going to discover what is the most common signing process of this user. So additionally, we're going to be able to detect what are the not common signing activities, and we're going to detect it as, well, these are not going to be a normal signing process. In this case, you can see right here that, again, we have a risk level. So all the signings are going to be recorded in Azure, and we are going to be able to consult all these in a risky signing report. So these kind of reports, guys, we are going to be able to establish certain filters. And for example, maybe I want to know which were the users that tried to access and generates a risky signing during the past 30 days, for example. Also, we can filter and discover which signings are classified as at risk and which of them were confirmed. For example, okay, this was a safe access, or maybe this one was a confirmed risky signing process and was completely blocked. So in these signing reports, we're going to be able to see a lot of different information of these signing processes. For example, also these kind of reports are going to provide that conditional access policies that were implemented and triggered, or for example, the multi-factor authentication details. If the user manage a specific device, well, we can get additional information for this device, the location of the signing, and also which application were used during the signing process. Again, you as an administrator, with all this information, you are going to be able to confirm the compromised user or confirm if the signing process was a safe one. Okay, guys. Now it's going to, previously we mentioned in a general way how multi-factor authentication works. So again, we're adding an extra challenge to this signing process using multi-factor authentication. So this is a two steps verification. And you can see right here that previously we used to work with a username and password. Well, let's face it. If we establish easy passwords, everybody is going to be able to maybe to guess the password. If we establish complex passwords, well, we are going to maybe forget the password. It's going to be very difficult to use it in every signing process. So that's why we can use different authentication methods. For example, a mobile phone, a 5G key. This is going to be related also with the use of smart cards and linked with the storage of certification. So using this multi-factor authentication increases identity security, and again, we are going to be able to limit the impact of credential exposure. Also, Azure multi-factor authentication it's going to be allows the provider of the request service to validate that the user really is a real person, because nowadays also the attackers implement the use of bots. So with this multi-factor authentication, always we're going to require the human factor to perform the authentication process. And well, in this case, this is a very good way to protect, again, our identities. We can directly enable multi-factor authentication for a specific user, or we can enable and establish some conditional access policies and select the users that they are going to be required to perform and also register to this multi-factor authentication. Again, we can define it as we have two different ways to secure the user that using sign in this, for example, this is a small screenshot of the multi-factor authentication window. So right here in the users tab, you are going to see all the users of your organization, and also you can select the user, and directly for all the selected users, you can establish to enable, enforce, or disable the multi-factor authentication process. So you can see right here for all these users at the moment, it is disabled, this multi-factor authentication. But again, you can enable for all the selected users the implementation, the request to enable a multi-factor authentication process during this next signing process. Again, this is important. This is going to be related with one concept called security default. For our organizations, that maybe if these organizations are a startup one or a small organization, and we don't want to manage all the security features and settings in a detailed way, we can enable one free feature called security defaults. So the security defaults automatically it's going to require it's going to enable the multi-factor authentication process for all the users in my tenant. And also it's going to allow us to protect especially our administrator users. So every time an administrator user or a user with an administrator role tries to access or perform an activity, it's going to be required to use the multi-factor authentication process. You can see right here in this small screenshot of the Azure portal, well, this is how you can manage this multi-factor authentication feature. For example, accounts blockout temporarily lock accounts from using the Azure AD multi-factor authentication if there are too many denied authentication attempts in a row, right? This one right here. The other one, for example, block and unblock users. This is going to block. This is very straightforward. Block specific users from being able to receive Azure AD multi-factor authentication requests, right? This right here, Purple Alert, this is going to be related with configuring the configuration of certain settings that allows users to report fraudulent verification requests. For example, if I am a user that perform multi-factor authentication process and I didn't make a signing process, but I was required to authorize in my mobile device the multi-factor authentication request. Well, I'm going to be sure that this is going to be a failed attempt of somebody else that are trying to use my credentials to access. So I'm going to be able to report this fraud access, and automatically this is going to be considered for, it is going to be registered in this section. Okay, I'm going to report that somebody else are trying to access and claim that it's going that it's me using my credentials. In the other hand, well, in this case we have the notification section. So with this, we're going to be able to enable notifications of events from this multi-factor authentication server. For example, the OAuth tokens, these are used in cloud-based Azure AD multi-factor authentication environments to manage the OAuth tokens from users. In this case, we have additionally as a setting, the phone call setting. So in this section, we can configure settings related to phone calls and greetings for cloud, or also also on-premise environments. So we can manage these phone call settings in this multi-factor authentication section. And finally, well, the providers. This section of providers, this will show any existing authentication providers that we may have associated with our account. So you can see that you can manage a lot of different settings of multi-factor authentication, and well, you have control completely to block and unblock your users. On the other hand, well, previously we mentioned these if-then statements. For that, we're going to use conditional access. So conditional access, again, it's going to take if certain scenario happen, then take the following action. This if statement is going to be identified as a signal. So this could be the user and the location. For example, I have a request from a user from Germany, but this request was performed in, for example, in Mexico. So according to this signal, well, I'm going to implement a policy, and I'm going to allow the access of the user, maybe validate the identity of a user with MFA, or directly block the access for this from this signal related. In the same way, we can establish these if-then statements with the following signals. For example, the application who is requesting sign in, the device that the user is trying to use to perform the signing process, or if Azure detects real-time risk. So according to these signals, this is going to be part of these if-then statements. We're going to verify every access attempt. And finally, if we authorize the access, the user is going to be able to access to, in a hybrid environment, to access to on-premise resources, to access to cloud applications, to our organizational data, or also to the Azure portal, right? So we're going to be able to enforce this decision across different resources. The conditions, well, in this case, we really saw that these are signals, and we're verifying every access attempt. So what happened if I establish in these conditional access policies, establish a policy directly to a specific user? This is going to be possible, or assigning a conditional access, a policy to a specific group. I can implement it. Maybe I'm going to protect the access of certain applications, so I can implement a specific conditional access policy to cloud applications. For example, I want to restrict my users to access to Spotify. So in this case, the users are not going to be able to access Spotify when they try to access with their organizational devices or using their organizational accounts. Also, according to the device state and the location of this sign-in attempt, I can establish specific conditions. We can implement conditions for the client application, and again, we are going to detect if the user is in risk. We are going to perform access to allow, enforce allow the access, enforce multi-factor authentication, or deny the access. So to finish these policies features, well, it's important to mention that we have also access reviews. So why? Why are important these access reviews? For example, let's think in when a new user or new employee joins to your organization, it is important to identify that or ensure that this user is going to have the right and the appropriate rights and roles to be productive. What happens when a user moves in our organization? Well, in this case, if I allow my users in a first part of their organizational life to access to certain resources, if my user moves from a department, it is important to validate that this access that previously it has, now it's going to be denied, or I'm going to remove this this particular access for a specific resource. And more in this scenario, it is important to take account more in the scenarios that when we have guest users from outside my organization. So again, we are going to be able to evaluate my users or guest users, what resources they have access. In this case, we're going to evaluate this membership of the groups. If my user belongs to a certain group, this user is going to access to the roles, licenses, and the resources assigned. If I evaluate again my employee or my guest user, well, I need to be sure that this new role, this new group, now is going to be assigned, and I'm going to revoke the access of the previous resources that my user used to have. Important thing right here, guys, it's that in this case, let me clean a little bit. Here we go. So if I am using an administrative role to my employee, well, if this employee have an administrator role and it moved from inside my organization, and it is not going to no longer require the use of this role, it is important to remove the privilege access. Why? Because maybe with this excessive or additional powering of our tenant, they can continue managing features that maybe in the new department or in the new section that he belongs, they are not, it is not necessary to have this assignment. So again, all these we can manage automatically with the use of access review. So this is going to be able, this is going to enable our company to verify the group membership, application access, the assignment of a license, and the privilege roles. With that, it's time to move to our next objective of our day number 1. Then we're going to continue with the second part of our day number 1. So this is going to be related with the access of the lab environment. all the features that we covered in this day number one, we're going to be able to practice with them in the lab environment. So please, guys, be prepared with your lab environment, and remember that you need to use a Microsoft account to access to your lab environment. Also, well, we're going to have different lab activities during this week. For example, for this day number one, you're going to be able, with the information that we covered in these 2 hours, you're going to be able to perform the lab from the number one to the number six. The lab number one is going to be related with role-based access control. So you're going to be able to manage certain roles in your demo lab environment. Also, well, previously we saw the policies, these if-then statements. You are going to be able to implement policies, apply it, and see, how does it affect the users of your demo tenant. Another feature that you're going to, well, another lab practices that you're going to be able to cover is the managing of resource manager logs, implementing multi-factor authentication, conditional access policies, and Azure AD identity protection features. Azure AD privileged identity management. This is going to be related with how we can manage the privileged roles or the administrator roles in Azure. We are going to see in this lab activity that all these privileged roles should be managed with additional care, because again, when you provide additional permissions to a user, they can manage features or resources that may affect your organization, for example, with your users, with your applications, or also block the entire organization to access to the Azure portal or the Office applications. So this is why it's important to manage all the privileged roles with privileged identity management. And well, we're going to be able to simulate in the last lab. You're going to be able to implement directory synchronization. This means that if you have, well, you're going to have in your demo environment an Active Directory forest, and you're going to be able to implement this Azure AD Connect tool, then start synchronizing your users between your on-premise, simulated on-premise environment and your cloud environment. But well, this is just for reference, guys. Let's continue with our topics. In this case, we're going to talk about our next objective, that is enterprise governance. So let's discover it. And well, it is important to start talking about the shared responsibility model. So right here, we have a small diagram for us when we decide to talk about hybrid environments. So hybrid environments, you can see that the responsibility may vary according to the activities that you perform. For example, on-premise, you take control of every aspect of your organization. You manage all your information and data, you manage all your devices, you manage with Active Directory all the accounts and identities. And also, well, you have dedicated servers to provide maybe resilience or high availability of Active Directory. You can have your own line of business applications. But again, the main idea right here is that you can see that on premise, you are going to have the complete responsibility of all these aspects. Also the physical host, the physical network, the physical data center. Now, let me clean a little bit. What happened when we start working with a cloud environment? The responsibility, it's not going to be completely yours. Now, you are going to share certain responsibilities with the cloud provider, in this case, with Microsoft, with Azure as cloud service provider. If you start using infrastructure as a service products, well, you are going to be assigned to manage up to here as a responsibility. For example, you are going to manage the operating system of your infrastructure as a service. For example, let's think for a moment a virtual machine. You are going to manage the network settings, also the applications that you are going to use. You are going to take care of what are going to be assigned users. You are going to remove it, clean it, organize them. Finally, well, this is going to be related with accounts and identities. Also, the communication between different devices and the information and data that you are going to manage with using this infrastructure as a service. So this responsibility may vary, again, according to the service that you are using. If you are going to use, for example, software as a service, you can see completely the differences. For example, software as a service and on-premise infrastructure, you can see that you are not going to take care or case manage the part of the applications, the network controls, and the operating system. This is going to be completely responsibility from Microsoft, and you are only going to share the responsibility of your identities and directory infrastructure. Again, there are some aspects that always are going to be your responsibility. In this case, you and your users are always going to be responsible of how they manage the information and data, in which state are their devices, and the management of accounts and identities, right? So that's why we talk about this shared responsibility model. So moving on with this shared responsibility, well, in this case, the cloud offers significant advantage from solving long-standing information security challenge. You can see right here, is satisfied responsibility, partially met responsibility, augmented responsibility, and cloud provider responsibility. This used to be the traditional approach, but now we're trying to focus to the cloud environment. So using this cloud-enabled approach, you can see how it looks completely different. So in an on-premise environment, guys, organizations likely have unmet responsibilities and also limited resources available to invest in, for example, security. In this case, this creates an environment where the attackers maybe are able to exploit these limited security aspects. So the above diagram, you can see, guys, it shows This traditional approach, where many security responsibilities are unmet due to the limited resources. On the other hand, well, we just move to the cloud one, and in the cloud one approach, you're also able to leverage cloud-based security capabilities for more effectiveness and use cloud intelligence to improve your threat detection and response time. So these guys, is this going to be, we can do this by shifting responsibilities to the cloud providers. In this way, our organization can get more security coverage, which enables them to relocate security resources. And also, it's important to think about the budget. So we are going to be able to manage in a proper way the budget and give additional priority for other business main important things. We're going to be able to manage or relocate these resources and budget to other business priorities. So it is important to understand the Azure hierarchy. In this case, first, you can see we have these management groups. This is going to be at the top of our hierarchy. Then we have subscriptions, and finally we have resource group. So first, the capability of grouping our subscriptions into a logical group. This is going to allow us for the building of organization models or new structuring models that apply within our Azure environment. Again, management groups is going to be at the top. And you can see that we have one management group and another different ones. For each management group, we can assign one subscription or more than one. For example, the development one have just one subscription. This is going to be related with non-production, and we can start creating resources for example, development process. Again, we can manage independently this Q&A subscription. So the subscription, this is going to be able to provision products, license, and other aspects to a specific account. And once that we have this subscription, well, we can start creating resources and group these resources in a specific resource group. For example, maybe in one resource group, I can have a virtual machine, firewall. We can have additional resources, but those are going to be contained in this resource group. So that's why we are talking about this Azure hierarchy. Another important feature to mention is, well, in this case, the Azure policy. So Azure policy, as right here says, it's a service that we use, create, assign, and manage. So you can see, for example, we can restrict or allow what are going to be the resources types to use. We can manage. For example, we're going to create a virtual machine. Well, we have different SKUs. For example, this is going to be related with, well, only users can create virtual machines with the basic performance. For example, 8 gigabytes of
RAM, of maybe they are going to storage only 64 gigabytes of information, and these information are going to be stored in hard disk drives instead using solid state drives. So we can use this Azure policy to establish these conditions, but now related with the resources. Talking about resources, well, where is going to be created the resource, we can restrict the locations in our organization, and we can specify these when we are deploying the resources. For example, I am going to allow only the deployment of virtual machines in the US. Or, okay, no, in this case, I'm going to restrict the deployment of virtual machines. I'm going to allow only in Europe. So again, are if-then statements that we can establish for our resources. In the same way, we can require a tag and its value, and we can establish if we want to create a backup from these resources, Azure backup. So what happens if one of our virtual machines, for a certain reason, are down and we need to take it back? Well, we can use this feature called Azure Backup to restore an image from this virtual machine, and this image is going to be automatically updated with Azure Backup. But again, it is important to establish Azure policies. Some of the advantages, as you can see, well, we can enforce these policies, and it's going to be also related with the compliance statements of our organization. We can apply these policies at scale, and also this is going to allow us to provide remediation if something went wrong. Previously, we talked about roles, so it is important to take back this role concept, because now we're going to talk about this Azure role-based access control. So what is this Azure role-based access control? Remember, what can I do in my organization? It is going to be related with the assigned. So we have some roles that are not privileged, maybe are just for read information. We can establish certain roles for specific resources. If the predefined roles are not enough for our organization, well, with the appropriate license, for example, Azure Premium P1 or P2, you can create custom roles. So these custom roles are going to allow you to create a new role with a specific name, and you are going to be able to assign manually which permissions are going to be related with this new custom role. For example, maybe I need a user to be able to manage applications and also to be able to read all the security log events. So instead assigning a lot of roles, I can create a custom role and add the required permissions, and then once that I have this custom role, I can assign directly to the specific user that I am interested in. What happens if we want to manage resources, but, well, not have the complete control? We can establish we can assign contributor roles. So these contributor roles are going to be able to manage the resources without being completely the owner or have the complete control. In the other hand, if you want to have the complete control of a specific resource, well, or you are the first user that creates a specific resource, you become automatically the owner and you have the owner role that has complete control over the resource. So this applies to a management group level, subscription level, resource group, and well, in this case, for the resources, this is going to be automatic and automated process. Now, you can see, well, we are going to talk about the security principle. So a security principle, this is going to be an object. Instead of create a user or manage a device, this security principle is going to represent in a certain way this user group or service principal or managed identity that is going to request access to Azure resources. For example, an application, maybe this application needs to perform changes in our resources, but how can we assign this privilege to perform the required actions? Well, in this case, we create a security principle for this application, and then we can assign the role to this security principle, and these actions now can be performed. So we can assign a role to any of these security principles. And finally, the changes in our resources could be possible to do. Continue talking about the assignment of the roles. Well, we can, for example, create a security principle. In this example, a role assignment is going to be the process of attaching a role definition to a user, group, service principal, or managed identity at a particular scope. So the following diagram shows an example of a role assignment. In this example, you can see right here, guys, we have a marketing group right here. This marketing group has been assigned the contributor role for the pharma sales resource group. So you can see right here, this pharma sales resource group. Now, marketing users do not have access to resources outside the pharma sales resource group unless they are part of another assignment. So it is important, guys, that, well, right here, if I have a user that is part for the marketing group and also it's part from another different group, let's put right here, group. Now this user is going to be able to manage the resources from this group. Let's call group chemical group, group Q, and group marketing group. So the resource group related. Now this user is going to be also able to manage, maybe as a contributor or as a reader, in the case for required to see log events, to read information about maybe security process. But additionally, it's going to be able to manage these resources of the pharma sales resource group. If this user have an additional role, right? So this is just one example. You can assign roles directly in the Azure portal, or well, you can also establish the assignment of these rules. You can see right here one example using the Azure portal, the Azure CLI, the Azure PowerShell, Azure SDKs, or also we can assign these roles using REST APIs. The Azure role-based access control, where it's time to talk about the scope. So the scope is a set of resources that the access applies to. For example, when you assign a role, you can further limit the actions allowed by defining a scope. This is helpful if we want to make someone a website contributor, but only for just one resource group. So you can see right here that example. This is just for one resource group. Maybe in Azure we have different resource groups, but this user is not going to be allowed to manage different resource groups. So, for example, in Azure, we can specify a scope at 4 different levels. For example, we can establish the management group, at the subscription group, at the subscription level, at the resource group, or directly, instead assigning the access to a complete resource group, we can assign at the resource level these roles. So the scopes, in a certain way, are structured in a parent-child relationship. You can see right here, it's going to be our parent, and the following ones are going to be the child. So we can assign the roles at any of these different levels or scopes, right, guys? In a similar way, well, the groups, the role assignment are transitive for groups, which means that if a user is a member of a group and that group is a member of another group that has a role assignment, the user will have the permission in the role assignment. You can see right here, the same example of the marketing group. So this is going to be related with a contributor role. Inside this marketing group, we have a design group. Automatically, well, it's going to provide the role assignment at these different levels. You can see right here. Instead of assigning directly a user and directly a role to this group, since we assign this role to the marketing group, now all these users are being assigned as contributors, right? Also, we can manage multiple role assignments. So what happens if we have multiple overlapping role assignments? The benefit of using Azure role-based access control is that this is an additive model. So our effective permission are the sum of all our role assignments. So you can see right here, and also previous examples that we mentioned. This user is granted the contributor role as the subscription scope, right? So since this user is assigned from here, well, in this case, the contributor role and also the reader role, you can see right here the two different roles, how to overlap. This is going to be related with the subscription, and this is going to be related with the resource group. Well, in this case, the sum of the contributor permission and the reader permission is effectively the contributor role for the subscription. Right here, it is this contributor role were assigned at this level. So we are going to keep this contributor role now with the resource group and also directly to the resources that this resource group contain. You can see the difference right here with that, this overlapping. Let's continue about the role definition. So a role definition, it's a collection of permissions. In this case, this is typically just called, well, the permissions is that what a role contains. In this case, a role definition lists the actions that can be performed, such as read, write, or also delete. The roles can be at the high level, like an owner, or we can assign a specific role, like a big virtual machine reader, right? So this is a specific, and the other one was more in general. Again, remember guys that we can assign roles, but by default, Azure includes several built-in roles that we can use. Some of them that we saw, it was a global administrator, the virtual machine contributor, and if these roles are not enough for us, always we can create a custom role. So we are going to assign are going to be the permissions of this specific role and assign them to a specific user. So you can see also this diagram related with how Azure AD admin roles and the Azure RBAC roles, this is going to work together. So the above diagram depicts how the classic subscription administrator roles, the RBAC roles, and the Azure AD administrator roles are related at the high level. So roles assigned at the higher scope, remember this, the assignment at the scope. The assignment of this scope, this is going to be related an entire subscription. So you can see that if I assign a role right here, this is going to be also applied for all this. After we extend our on-premise Active Directory to the cloud, again, all this using a specific tool called Azure AD Connect. Let me make a small pause right here and mention that when you synchronize your identities to the cloud environment, we are going to use in a certain way a bridge to your on-premise. So this tool is going to be called Azure AD Connect. This Azure AD Connect tool is going to serve as a bridge to manage and synchronize my identities from the on-premise infrastructure to the cloud environment. So now, taking back the Azure role-based access control, after we extend our on-premise Active Directory to the cloud by using this Azure AD Connect tool, our employees can use and manage their Azure subscriptions by using their existing work identities. So these Azure subscriptions automatically connect to Azure AD for a single sign-on uh, process and well, and access management. When we disable an on-premise Active Directory account, automatically it's going to lose the access to all the Azure subscription connected with Azure AD. So this is one of the benefits. Azure RBAC enables this fine-grained access management for Azure. And also using this RBAC feature, we can grant just the amount of access of that users need to perform their jobs. With that, guys, well, it's important to mention that we can establish also policies for this. So Azure RBAC manage who has access to Azure resources, what areas they have access, and what they can do with those resources. On the other hand, the Azure policies focus on resource properties during the deployment and for those who already exist. For example, you can see right here that we can implement a resource, we can configure the properties, so we can establish and evaluate these conditions, and then if it is compliant, we're going to generate a condition. On the other hand, with the roles, we can establish conditions, we can evaluate the roles, and finally, the effect, if we are going to allow or deny to continue with these changes. So the most important roles that we have in the built-in roles for Azure resources, we have many, but the most important ones are these ones. For example, the owner, this is going to have the complete control of the resource. This is very straightforward right here, guys. This allows to manage everything, including the access to the resources. What happens if we want to add somebody else to manage the resources, except who access to this? Well, we're going to add a user or a guest with a contributor role. Now, if we want that somebody can view everything, we want to avoid to perform any change, we are going to assign only the reader role. And finally, we have this user access administrator role. So this is going to allow us to manage user access to Azure resources. Now, we can move to another different features. So this feature is going to be related with resource logs. Let's think for a moment that we are an administrator. So you as an administrator, you may need to log a subscription, resource group, or also maybe you need to log a resource. Why? Maybe you need to prevent other users in our organization or in your organization from accidentally modify or delete a critical resource in your organization. So that's why it is important to talk about resource logs. We can set a log level with these resources. So this could be cannot delete or only for read. In this case, in the Azure portal, these logs are called delete and read only respectively. So you can see right here, read only means authorized users can read a resource, but they can delete or update the resource. On the other hand, the delete, it equals cannot delete, or means that authorized users can still read and modify, but they can't remove or delete this resource. That's why we are adding this new resource log for a specific resource. Previously, we saw that, well, it is important to manage identities, protect identities. It is important that we can manage these users and roles at different scopes. But what happens if we need to continue making the same activity in a long period of time? Well, in this case, it's important to mention this feature called Azure blueprints. So as the name says, just as the blueprint, this allows an engineer or an architect to sketch in a certain way a project design parameters. So the Azure blueprints enable cloud architects and central information technology groups to define this repeatable set of Azure resource process that maybe our organization is trying to implement a lot of times and repeat it again and again. So you can establish this blueprint, and it's going to adhere to our organization standard, patterns, and requirements. Also, these Azure blueprints makes possible for the development teams to rapidly build and stand up for new environments. So you can create new environments easy. This is going to be reusable, and well, you can apply immediately with the resources that we have in our organization, and also with the policies that we already have in our organization. You can see that also a package or container of composing focus specific sets of standards, patterns, and requirements are going to be possible to use. So with this package, we have ready this possibility to deploy new developments, these reusable developments in our organization. Now, guys, it's time to talk about the Azure subscription management. So, what is this Azure subscription? Again, previously we saw, let me take back some slides. Okay, at the moment it is, here we go. Remember these subscriptions and the scopes? It is important to have a proper way the subscriptions that we have in our organization. So how can we achieve this goal of managing the subscriptions? Well, that's why we have a feature called the Azure Subscription Management. In this case, taking back our slide, when we create a new subscription, this is going to be hosted in our Azure AD tenant. What happens if we want to to give other access to our subscription, or well, in this case, to the resources, maybe we need to invite them to join first to our tenants. Then this is going to doing this helps us with control access to our subscription and levels. Also, we can create conditional. We can create not conditional. In this case, when you add different subscription, you can we may want an additional subscription to avoid reaching, for example, subscription limits. And this also could be, maybe we want to create an additional subscription to create separate environments for billing and security. Or also, in the previous example, we saw that we were managing different subscriptions. So we can isolate data for compliance reasons. For example, for the development team, I'm going to manage a complete subscription. For the Q&A team, for the development team, I'm going to use a certain subscription. For the production team, I'm going to use a different subscription. So this is going to create separate environments for billing and security. That's why we can choose these subscriptions, add or manage the subscriptions. And if we want to create an Azure subscription under our organization enterprise agreement, we need to have an account owner role for our organization. That's why we cover the roles, because to manage these subscriptions, it is important to have the appropriate role. On the other hand, let's think for a moment that if you have the account owner role and you need to transfer the billing ownership of our Azure subscription, if we are leaving our organization of we want to our subscription to be billed to another account, this is going to be the appropriate way to do this. We are going to manage all the subscriptions and manage the owners, and also we're going to be able to transfer the billing ownership to another account. This is going to provide for the administrators, for the new administrators, the permission for billing tasks, right? So guys, with this Azure subscription management, we cover this module number 1, first 3 topics related. The first one with Azure Active Directory. Again, first we saw how to manage the identities, how to create it. We can add external users. Then, when identity protection, we are going to discover and protect how they are according to the if-then statements and their behavior. If these identities are in risk, or the signing process is on risk. So we are going to establish additional conditions to avoid this risky access. And well, once that we have our identities created, protected, now we assign roles to manage resources or to manage specific activities in our tenant. All these, it could be to a resource group, a resource, a subscription, and finally, we can create these subscriptions. These mail subscriptions. Sorry, just give me a second. Okay, here we go. yes, we can manage these subscriptions to finish the management of our entire subscription related to the billing, related with the ownership, and in the case of, for example, what happens when an organization are having maybe our organization add and hire a small company. Well, maybe that small company are going to allow us to transfer if they are managing an Azure Active Directory tenant. Well, we can add that subscription and manage the new billing ownership and also assign the new permissions to our internal users, right? So that's why we cover these three different topics in this part number one of the session. Now, guys, it's time to finish our session. Well, we're going to take a small, let me open my camera. Thank you so much for joining us in this first part of the session. Well, we are going to finish this first part of the theory. As you can see right here, we finish our session content. So in the next, we're going to take a small coffee break, and we're going to continue with the second part of the session related with the lab activities. Again, it is important to mention that you have access to a link related with cloudweeks.learnondemand.net. Once that you access to this portal, remember with the use of your Microsoft account, you are going to be able to access to the lab environment and start deploying the virtual machines and your sandbox environment to perform the lab activities. So right here, I have the list of that activities related. The first one is going to be related with role-based access control activities. Also remember that I previously mentioned that you're going to be able to create your policies and test it with your demo users. Also enable multi-factor authentication and some of these related topics that we cover during this day number one. So guys, remember we're going to use additional link. So I'm going to see you back in the second part with a new link in the next 30 minutes. Again, thank you so much for joining me in this day number one. And yes, we're going to share the link of these lab activities and lab environment in the chat. Also, please check your email. Maybe you receive it by email. But, well, we're going to leave the information in the Q&A section. And also, if you have additional questions, you can leave it right here and see you in the next 30 minutes. Thank you so much, guys. In this case, it's time to continue. Well, I noticed that you have amazing answers from our also partner David. So thank you so much to David helping us with these questions. And well, again, guys, thank you for joining us in this day number one. So see you back in the next 30 minutes. Thank you so much, guys.